Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to take a pretty giant leap, fusing thousands of years of ancient philosophy with some of the newest insights from neuroscience. And it's all to answer a question that I think touches every single one of us. Why does it feel like perpetual dissatisfaction is our default setting? We're doing a deep analysis on this surprisingly tight convergence between, on one hand, ancient Buddhist philosophy and its approach to suffering, and on the other, the core ideas of modern evolutionary psychology. Our sources really center on Robert Wright's powerful and honestly slightly unnerving thesis that natural selection engineered our minds for survival, but not for truth, and definitely not for lasting happiness. Okay, let's unpack this fascinating stack of sources, starting with this core idea that our survival instincts might be, rooted in a kind of necessary delusion.
What's fascinating here is how the ancient wisdom of Buddhism provides a remarkably accurate map. A map for the exact cognitive and emotional problems that modern neuroscience is only just now identifying with its own tools.
So it's like they had the map, and we're just now building the satellite to prove it's correct.
Exactly. If evolution's goal is teleologically organized, and what that means is it's designed solely to pass on genes, then our ability to see reality clearly or, to be happy, that's a secondary concern at best. In fact, if a little distortion helps us survive, distortion wins.
That's a stark framework. So if evolution actually favored delusion over truth, what does that look like for you on, say, a random Tuesday?
It looks like perpetual striving. The evolutionary psychology view, following Wright, points to two central problems baked into our biology. First, the mind just systematically distorts reality. We're biased toward self-aggrandizement, social comparison, overestimating our own importance, all things that boost fitness, but they don't really reflect reality.
And the second problem?
The second is that this system creates a mechanism of perpetual dissatisfaction, just to keep us moving.
Right, the idea that we are wired for delusional thinking.
Yeah.
That's a hard pill to swallow. But I guess if natural selection favored it, it must have provided a better survival outcome than total objectivity, at least in some cases.
Absolutely. Think about the mind as modular. It's not one single integrated consciousness. It's more like a collection of subselves or executive systems.
Like a committee meeting where everyone has a different agenda.
A very chaotic committee meeting, yes. These modules often have different, sometimes conflicting goals. So, for example, a module that's driving short-term social status might directly conflict with one designed for, say, long-term parental investment. And the system that wins out in the short term isn't necessarily the one that delivers overall clarity or contentment, that internal chaos. It's a feature, not a bug, if the modules are maximizing reproductive fitness.
Okay, and what's the engine driving all this chaotic striving? Our sources point right to something called the seeking disposition. This is the foundational biological drive for motivation itself.
That's it. Seeking is this essential emotional brain process that drives all of our explorative and approach behaviors. It's what generates that feeling of anticipation, excitement, the little internal voice that says, go get that thing.
Whether that thing is a piece of fruit or the next notification on your phone.
Doesn't matter. Seeking is the mechanism that gets us out of the comfortable chair. And we're not just talking about some vague psychological desire. This is measurable physical pathways in the brain.
So can you break down the neurobiology a bit for us? Because we're about to get into some acronyms here.
Of course. So the seeking system is tightly tied to the mesolimbic dopamine system, or MLDA. And when we mention the ventral tegmental area, the VTA, think of that as the brain's dopamine factory.
Okay, the factory.
And it sends that dopamine to the nucleus accumbens, or NAC, which is the primary reward receiving center. It's the part that says, yes, this is worth pursuing, do more of that.
And what's actually happening neurally when that system is active?
What you're seeing are dopamine-promoted high-frequency oscillations. Specifically, we're talking about these transient synchronized gamma waves. Those are the seeking neurodynamic impulses. This system is ancient, it's powerful, and it is relentless. It really doesn't care if the goal is necessary for survival or just a momentary distraction. It just generates the impulse to approach.
And this relentless pursuit, it sets us up for that famous evolutionary trap, the hedonic treadmill. We're designed to reach a goal, feel a brief spike of satisfaction.
And then immediately look for the next thing. It's the core paradox of the survival machine. The system is explicitly not designed to let you stay satisfied for long.
Because if our ancestors got comfortable and just stopped seeking,
they were probably eaten or they starved. Natural selection pressures us to be perpetually dissatisfied. The moment a reward is achieved, the bar moves. The NAC registers the hit, and the seeking system reactivates for the next target.
And that perpetual craving, the comparing ourselves to an idealized future or to what our neighbor has, that is exactly what Buddhist philosophy points to as the source of suffering. It's profound that ancient wisdom, relying only on introspection, mapped this biological trap without a single fMRI scanner.
And you can trace the pathology right back to this system. Abnormal seeking hyperexcitability, where the attractive power of things gets dialed way up, that's the mechanism behind addiction.
Incentive sensitization.
Right. And on the flip side, a deficiency in the system is often linked to a depressive state. So this relentless drive to acquire, to possess, to look, it's a measurable neurological process that just confirms the ancient insight. Craving causes suffering.
So we've established the why we're wired for this perpetual striving and dissatisfaction, but now let's get into the how. How does that striving actually manifest in the moment-to-moment process of thought and just systematically block joy?
This is where we bridge the gap with the concept of papañca. It's a Pali term that translates best to something like mental proliferation.
Mental proliferation.
Yes. It's the mind's almost unstoppable, non-stop tendency to take any simple sense object, a sight, a sound, a memory, a mild irritation, and just spread out, elaborate on it, and smother it with waves of mental commentary.
The narrative loops we all recognize as the monkey mind.
Precisely. You get a slightly ambiguous text message. Papañca isn't just you reading the message. It's the next 10 minutes you spend crafting replies in your head, analyzing the tone, worrying about implied meanings, dredging up past conflicts.
Right.
And most of this commentary is illusory, repetitive, and obsessive. It systematically blocks mental calm. And the themes that drive it, according to Buddhist texts, are deeply rooted. Craving, conceit, or self-importance, and our own biased views.
Our sources use the Honeyball discourse to visualize this. It outlines these cognitive layers. Maybe let's start from the bottom up.
Yeah, let's see this as a kind of waterfall. Way down at the base, where you have the most tranquil, luminous awareness. That's the simple moment of contact. This is just the simultaneous coming together of a sense organ, like your eye, an object, and a moment of consciousness. It's pure data. No story yet.
But the mind never stops at pure data.
It immediately jumps to the next layer. Perception. Perception is the function that makes sense of that contact. It imposes the images, the words, the concepts. This is where your brain starts projecting its learned categories onto the world.
And then on top of perception
comes thought. What one perceives, that one thinks about. And finally, based on those thoughts, you get papañca. What one thinks about, that one mentally proliferates.
So as the mind moves from simple contact all the way up to full proliferation, it's moving farther and farther into what our sources call macro construction. We see less of things as they are, and more of things as we construe them to be.
Exactly. This layering explains why we can't just stop thinking. It's a systematic, cumulative process. And modern cognitive science, especially the work on mind wandering, confirms just how out of our control this proliferation really is.
And this, for me, is where it gets really interesting, connecting this ancient idea to subpersonal chaos.
Right. Thomas Metzinger's work suggests that most of our conscious thought, including mind wandering, daydreams, rumination, is primarily a subpersonal process. It's not a form of mental action that you intentionally choose.
That's a huge claim.
It is. Empirical research shows that for roughly 2/3 of our conscious lives, we are not mentally autonomous. We lack the capacity for intentional inhibition, for veto control over what's happening in our heads.
2/3. That's a staggering figure. So for 2/3 of our waking life, we're basically just passengers watching a narrative stream we aren't even driving. The default state is an unnoticed loss of self-control.
And that realization is the whole point of the practice. It defines the goal to achieve autonomy, or mental autonomy. The capacity to control your conscious contents in a goal-directed way, anchored by the ability to intentionally inhibit, suspend, or terminate a thought. That's the veto control.
So if that mind-wandering state is the problem, what does autonomy actually look like in the brain? How does the brain signal to itself, okay, I am in control right now?
It seems to require the brain to activate a specific self-representation, which our sources call the epistemic agent model, or EAM.
EAM.
Think of the EAM as the brain's internal ID card that tells the system, I am the entity that is actively constructing knowledge and controlling attention. A long episode of mind wandering is essentially a collapse of that EAM.
Which brings us to the intervention. How does a practice like meditation act as a functional mechanism to reclaim that agency and rebuild the EAM?
Meditation, particularly Vipassana or insight meditation, is really a technology designed to reverse the process of papañca. It's designed to move the mind back down that waterfall toward non-proliferation. When you sit and your mind drifts, and it will, the moment you decide to gently redirect attention back to the breath, or to just non-judgmentally observe a thought without getting on the train, that decision is what's called a second-order mental action.
So that repetitive, really subtle decision to just regain attention that is actively engaging the EAM, you're exercising the veto control we've lost.
Precisely. It's not about just relaxing, it's self-generated neurocomputational regulation. And this practice can involve some deeply counterintuitive methods. Our sources highlight that Zen, for instance, encourages students to purposefully open themselves up to unpleasant experiences.
Like focusing on pain or even the really repulsive contents of the body.
Yes. Feces, bile, phlegm, blood, things we're programmed to avoid.
Why that radical approach? Why force the mind toward the gross or the painful?
Because acceptance and non-suppression weaken their power. The evolutionary mind wants to recoil from pain and the reality of decay. By facing it non-judgmentally, you weaken the grip of the subpersonal system that's trying to run away. You're intentionally dissolving that automatic, self-referential loop of avoidance that causes so much suffering.
And we can connect this back to modern complexity theory. This practice of self-regulation allows the biological system to manage what neuroscientists call the internal gap. I think the analogy here really helps.
It does. The internal gap is simply the divergence between the system's anticipation of a future state and the realized current state. Think of it like a thermostat. If the thermostat anticipates 70 degrees, but it measures 68, that 2-degree gap is the error signal that kicks on the heat.
And in the mindful state, you're interacting with that error signal differently.
Exactly. In meditation, you're intervening in that loop. Instead of passively following the dictates of the seeking system, which is constantly generating an error signal by anticipating rewards we can't maintain, you achieve what's called epistemic self-causation.
You interrupt the downward loop.
You move from being passively constructed by your environment to achieving the conscious experience of actively constituting yourself as a thinker. In essence, the entire practice is one of disidentification. You are working to observe and disidentify with all the subpersonal processes, the commentary, the biases, the craving that evolution is constantly building for you.
And by gaining that distance, you weaken the automatic grip of that evolutionary bias and allow for a more accurate, less constructed view of reality. So what does this all mean for you, the listener, navigating the modern world?
It means we have a really complete two-part framework for suffering. Evolutionary psychology and neuroscience explain why we suffer. We're biologically driven by dissatisfaction, by the seeking system, built for survival, not contentment.
And cognitive science explains how we suffer.
Right. Through papañca, through mind wandering, which are non-agentive, subpersonal processes running on autopilot for most of our lives.
And then Buddhism provides the practical technology mindfulness to actually interrupt that loop. It enables you to engage in self-regulation and potentially achieve autonomy, escaping the default constraints evolution put on you. It's the ultimate attempt to switch from a system focused purely on self-maintenance to one capable of objective self-description. But let me leave you with a final provocative thought. We established that regaining autonomy is linked to activating that epistemic agent model, the EAM. Our sources suggest that the subjective feeling of control, that moment when you successfully snap out of a deep rumination or you have that aha moment of clarity, that feeling may not be functional control itself. It might be a necessary, adaptive neurocomputational fiction.
The brain creates this illusion of agency, a kind of confabulation, because it needs to maintain a coherent self-model over time. You need to feel like you're in charge just to function.
Which raises a really deep question, one that challenges the entire practice. If the feeling of I broke free is just another useful trick the survival brain plays on us to maintain coherence, how can we ever truly distinguish genuine autonomous self-control from a more sophisticated, curated, subpersonal cognitive illusion? And does it even matter if we're truly free as long as the pain stops? Something profound to chew on during your next mindful moment.